In the winter of 1878, in a hospital ward in Bristol, England, a surgeon named Jonathan Hutchinson did something that horrified his colleagues. He painted the walls white. Not cream. Not gray. Not the dull stone tones every hospital in Europe had used for centuries. White. Blinding, sterile, absolute white, floor to ceiling, in a building where people were dying of infections nobody yet understood. His colleagues thought he had lost his mind. White was the color of shrouds. White was the color you wrapped around a corpse before burial. To paint a room where the sick were fighting for their lives in the color of death seemed, to 19th century doctors, almost cruel. But Hutchinson wasn't thinking about death. He was thinking about dirt. Because in white, dirt cannot hide. At the time, nobody understood germ theory the way we do today. Louis Pasteur's ideas were still controversial. Joseph Lister's antiseptic techniques were being mocked in operating theaters across Britain. But Hutchinson and a handful of reformist physicians had noticed something simple, almost embarrassingly obvious: hospitals with visibly cleaner wards had fewer deaths. And the fastest way to make filth visible was to remove every color that could hide it. Within 2 decades, white tile, white linen, and white coats became the global standard of medicine, not because anyone had proven white killed germs, but because white made it impossible to pretend a room was clean when it wasn't. Patients began to behave differently in these rooms too. They spoke more quietly. They trusted the nurses more. Surgeons reported that patients were more compliant, more willing to be still, more willing to believe they would survive. Nobody had explained why. They only knew that white worked on the mind as much as it worked on the eye. That mystery is where our story really begins. Here is the strange truth science would only confirm more than a century later: white is not, technically, a color at all. When light enters your eye, the photoreceptors on your retina, the cones, detect red, green, and blue wavelengths. When all three are stimulated at roughly equal, high intensity, your brain doesn't perceive no color. It constructs the sensation of white. White is not a wavelength sitting out there in the world waiting to be seen. White is a decision your brain makes. Which means every single time you have ever looked at something white, a wedding dress, a hospital wall, a blank page, you were not looking at an object's true nature. You were looking at your own visual cortex working overtime to interpret an absence, and filling that absence with meaning. And that is the first hidden truth this episode will build on: white is less a color and more a psychological blank canvas, one that human civilizations have filled, again and again, with whatever they needed it to mean. Here is the idea that will rearrange how you see this color forever. White does not carry meaning on its own. It borrows meaning entirely from context, culture, and power. And because it is so easily filled, it has become one of the most manipulated colors in human history. Used again and again by those in power to signal purity, superiority, authority, or truth, whether or not any of those things were actually present. White has never simply meant clean. White has meant whatever the people in charge needed it to mean. Let's prove it: across 2,000 years, 5 civilizations, and more industries than you'd expect. Ancient Egypt. Priests wore garments of pure white linen, believed to be the only fabric acceptable to the gods. But producing bleached white linen was labor-intensive and expensive, meaning that only the priestly and ruling classes could regularly appear this pure. Purity, in other words, was manufactured, and it was expensive. Ancient Rome. Politicians running for office wore a toga rubbed with chalk to achieve a brilliant, uniform white, the toga candida. This is the direct root of the English word, candidate. The whiter your toga, the more visibly trustworthy you appeared to voters, a purely visual signal of integrity that had nothing to do with actual character. Medieval and Renaissance Europe. Brides did not traditionally wear white. For most of European history, brides wore their best dress, in whatever color that happened to be, often deep reds, blues, or golds, since those dyes signaled wealth. White wedding dresses only became fashionable after Queen Victoria wore white lace to her wedding in 1840. It wasn't tradition. It was one woman's personal choice, amplified by newspapers, that re-engineered an entire culture's idea of what a wedding was supposed to look like within a single generation. Colonial societies, 18th and 19th centuries. In numerous colonial contexts, white clothing became deliberately associated with civility, cleanliness, and moral superiority, a visual hierarchy used to justify social and racial stratification. Historians studying colonial dress codes have noted how white fabric, difficult to maintain in labor and field conditions, became a marker separating the ruling class from those who worked the land. Purity as a costume only the powerful could afford to keep unstained. Religious architecture. From the white marble of Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan's Taj Mahal, completed in 1653, to the whitewashed mosques of North Africa and the white stone of Greek Orthodox churches on Santorini, white has been architecture's preferred language for signaling the sacred, the eternal, and the untouchable. Modern medicine. By the early 20th century, the white coat had become the uniform of the physician worldwide. Studies in medical psychology have since documented what's now called the white coat effect. Patients report higher trust, greater compliance, and even measurably different blood pressure readings simply based on the presence of a white coat, regardless of the actual competence of the person wearing it. Fashion and luxury. In the 20th century, designers like Coco Chanel deliberately used white to signal minimalist luxury, the idea that true wealth doesn't need color or ornamentation to prove itself. A white shirt, a white gallery wall, a white product box, all borrowed the same unspoken message: we have nothing to hide, and nothing to prove. Technology. When Apple redesigned its product photography and packaging in the early 2000s, it chose white almost exclusively: white iPods, white boxes, white backgrounds in every advertisement. Design historians have pointed out this wasn't accidental. White background photography removes context and competition, making the product feel like the only object that exists, isolated and pure. Every one of these examples, separated by centuries and continents, tells the same underlying story. White is not chosen because it is inherently pure. White is chosen because it is the most effective color for performing purity, trust, or superiority, convincingly enough that people stop questioning whether the performance is real. This is the thread tying every story in this episode together. White is not a statement of truth. It is the most persuasive costume of truth ever invented. Every culture we've just walked through used white the same way, not because the color contains some universal, biological signal of cleanliness or goodness, but because human beings collectively agreed to read it that way, and then powerful people exploited that agreement. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If white's meaning is manufactured rather than natural, what else have you been trusting simply because it appeared white? Here is where the story gets darker. While white was busy performing purity in the West, it was performing the exact opposite in vast parts of Asia. In China, Korea, Japan, and across much of the Indian subcontinent, white has been, for centuries, the traditional color of mourning and death. Widows in parts of India and China have historically worn white, not black, to signal grief. Funeral shrouds across many Asian cultures are white. In Confucian tradition, white was explicitly the color reserved for death rituals precisely because it was considered the absence of the vibrancy of life. So the same wavelength, the same physical light hitting the same human retina, has meant, for roughly half the world's population throughout history, not purity, but the total absence of it, loss, emptiness, the end of a life. Here is the revelation this forces us to confront: white doesn't contain purity or death within itself at all. It contains nothing. It is a mirror that reflects whatever meaning a civilization needs to survive its biggest questions: birth and death, power and equality, cleanliness and decay. Every single culture in history has looked into that blank white mirror and seen its own deepest values staring back. That is not a coincidence of fashion. That is one of the most consistent psychological patterns in the story of human civilization. You would think, in a secular, scientific 21st century, that this ancient psychological trick would have faded. It hasn't. It has only gotten more sophisticated. Walk into an Apple store, a minimalist skincare boutique, or a modern art gallery, and you'll notice the same design language: white walls, white light, white packaging. Retail psychologists have long noted that white retail environments are associated with perceptions of higher price and higher quality, even when the actual product is identical to one sold in a more colorful setting. In hospitals and clinics today, white is being deliberately reconsidered. Environmental psychology research has found that excessive white in patient rooms can increase feelings of sterility, isolation, and even anxiety, the opposite of the calm it was originally meant to project. Many modern hospitals are now intentionally softening their palettes for exactly this reason. In social media and tech interfaces, white space, literally called white space by designers, is used deliberately to direct attention, reduce visual noise, and make content feel more premium and trustworthy. Every time you scroll through a clean, white background app interface, you are experiencing a design principle whose psychological roots trace back to Roman politicians chalking their togas. In politics, white clothing is still used today as a deliberate visual signal of unity, purity of intention, or moral high ground, a costume borrowed, whether consciously or not, from 2,000 years of the same trick. In minimalist branding, from tech startups to luxury skincare to high-end architecture, white remains the fastest, cheapest way to say, "Trust me," without saying anything at all. So what is actually happening inside your brain when you encounter white? As established earlier, white is a constructed perception, the result of your cone cells being stimulated across red, green, and blue wavelengths simultaneously, which your visual cortex interprets as an absence of hue. Beyond the visual mechanism, color psychology researchers, including foundational work by Andrew Elliott and Marcus Meyer on color and psychological functioning, have shown that color can measurably influence perception and behavior in specific, testable contexts, though researchers caution these effects are often subtle, context-dependent, and should not be overstated as universal or absolute rules. What does appear well supported is this: because white reflects nearly all visible light rather than absorbing it, environments that are predominantly white tend to be perceived as more open, more spacious, and cognitively simpler to process, which is likely why the brain associates it with clarity and cleanliness. At the same time, research into perceptual deprivation, the discomfort some people report in visually blank, understimulating environments, suggests that too much undifferentiated white can tip from feeling clean into feeling unsettling, particularly in enclosed spaces like hospital rooms. In short, white is neither purely calming nor purely alarming. Its effect depends entirely on context, culture, and the associations your particular mind has built around it over a lifetime, which brings us to you. Think back through your own life for a moment. The white walls of the room you were born in. The white coat of the first doctor who ever touched you. The white pages of every notebook you learned to write in, blank and waiting, somehow feeling more serious than a colored one ever could. The white dress you may have worn, or seen someone else wear, on one of the most important days of their life. The white sneakers that, for reasons you never quite question, look more expensive than the colored pair sitting right beside them. The white packaging of the last, premium, product you bought, that made you trust the brand before you'd read a single word about what was inside. You did not choose to feel any of this. You inherited it, from Roman politicians, Victorian brides, colonial hierarchies, 20th century doctors, and Silicon Valley designers, all of whom, across 2,000 years, kept teaching the human brain the same lesson: white equals trust. And your brain, without ever asking your permission, believed them. White was never empty. It only looked that way. Underneath that blankness sits one of the longest-running psychological experiments in human history, a color that civilizations have used to sanctify their gods, elect their leaders, mourn their dead, sell their products, and quietly divide the powerful from the powerless, all using nothing but the total absence of hue. We call it purity. We call it cleanliness. We call it truth. But what white has always really been is a mirror, and every civilization that has ever stared into it has simply seen the reflection of what it most needed to believe about itself. The next time something appears to you as simply, perfectly white, ask yourself one question: is this actually pure, or has someone, somewhere, simply taught me to see it that way. But white was never alone. Because for every civilization that used white to represent purity and truth, there was another color, sitting in the shadows, doing something far more dangerous. A color so powerful that ancient rulers made it illegal for ordinary citizens to wear. A color that has started wars, funded empires, and, according to some historians, quite possibly triggered its own kind of madness in the men who obsessed over it most. A color that isn't just felt, like white. A color that has been known, throughout history, to be hungered for. Next time, on Language of Colors, we uncover the secret history of purple.